The survival horror genre has seen quite the revival in recent years. After seeing a dip in the mid-2000s where action took a more center stage, more survival-focused horror games have been making a comeback. With Alan Wake 2 winning tons of awards at the Game Awards, the slew of remakes of survival horror classics such as Resident Evil, Dead Space, and whatever Bloober Team is doing with that Silent Hill game, as well as many others, we survival horror fans have been eating good as of late. But there's one franchise I almost never see talked about after its initial release, and I think that's kind of a shame, because despite it being a bit of a goofy and niche title, it's one of my favorites, and one that I don't think gets enough appreciation. In the near infinite amount of media that we get every year, it feels like this one's been swept under the radar despite having many good qualities. The sheer uniqueness of its setting and visual aesthetic intrigued me back in the day, helped of course by some very good marketing. I mean, look at this. However, going back and playing them recently, I believe they've held up quite well, and today that's what I'm going to take a very extensive look at. The video will be broken down into a bit of a background of its development because I think that stuff like that's neat, as well as a modernish retrospective review of the series as a whole, recapping basically the entire plot and touching on gameplay elements and their strengths as we go, ending on why I think it's an underrated series. So spoiler alert for a decade-old game series, and as always I'll have timestamps in the description if you want to skip around. Intro stuff over, this is going to be a long video, so grab a snack and a drink and get comfy. This is The Evil Within, the most underrated survival horror franchise. I wanted to go over some development history first, so if you aren't interested in game studio history or trivia, skip ahead to here. This series of games was made by the studio Tango Gameworks, who developed the recent hit Hi-Fi Rush, and founded by the absolute legend Shinji Mikami. If you don't know this guy, undoubtedly you know at least one of the games he's had at hand in either directing or producing. Most known for creating the Resident Evil series, he started his career at Capcom, where he worked on many of the earlier entries from 1 to 4. And with the popularity of 4, you could argue that he was influential in revolutionizing the third-person shooter genre that's become so popular today. After the success of 4, he wanted to do something other than horror, so he along with other top talent from Capcom were transferred over to Clover Studios, a subsidiary of Capcom where he directed the absolute gem of a game that is God Hand. Leaving Clover in 2006 due to feeling stifled by Capcom's corporate management, the studio was shut down, but would eventually go on to become Platinum Games, the makers of all your favorite over-the-top beat-em-up games. However, this wasn't much better since Platinum was, and I quote, overwhelmingly understaffed, and he regards his final year there as the second worst in his career. In 2010, he founded Tango Gameworks along with several talented people who resigned from Platinum and Capcom, including Akumi Nakamura, who did most of the gorgeous art direction for both of these games. They would then begin work on several small projects, however, shortly after, they would run into significant financial trouble, which Mikami only commented that something happened, which is strangely ominous. However, our pals over at Bethesda would step in to assist, and by assist I mean add the studio to its ever-growing amalgamation. They would then start development on what would eventually become The Evil Within, and while initially Mikami didn't want to make more survival horror games, there was a demand for them, and he felt that recent titles relied more on action than survival, so he wanted to make a game that returns to the roots of survival horror. This would really show in how the gameplay is designed, but I'll get to that when I talk about the gameplay. The game released generally positive reviews and was popular enough to warrant 3 DLCs and eventually a sequel, but I'll get to those later. With that tangent over, we get to what the video is actually about. In The Evil Within 1, you play as Crimson City detective Sebastian Castellanos, who's sent to Beacon Mental Hospital to investigate a call about multiple homicides along with your longtime partner Joseph Oda, Oscar Connolly, and new to the force Julie Kidman, who seems to know more about what's going on than she's letting on.
Nothing yet. I'm sure we'll know everything once we get there.
Upon arriving, you walk into the hospital and stumble upon a massacre in the lobby area, with only one doctor left alive, mumbling about someone named Ruvik.
Can't be real. Impossible. Ruvik is...
You go check the nearby cameras, and in doing so you see a live feed of some officers shooting at someone off screen, who are then, in the fashion of Albert Wesker or Neo from The Matrix, walked up to and presumably slapped to death.
What the hell?
The man then looks at the camera before vanishing and reappearing behind Sebastian, knocking him out. This is a great cold open for the story, as it elaborates on absolutely nothing, but it does suck the player into the mystery and gives them a small taste of what to expect as the game progresses. Waking up, you find yourself strung up, upside down alongside other bodies, with a terrifying butcher-like man referred to in-game as the Sadist. This opening part is a perfect showcase for the janky storytelling, as well as the visuals and overall aesthetic of the game as a whole. It's gritty and visceral, almost industrial in nature, similar to the Saw series, with great body horror set pieces and an extremely tense atmosphere. And while it obviously still heavily leans into the bizarre and supernatural, the world kind of feels grounded in reality, even if that reality is surreal and nightmare-like in its presentation, sometimes moving from area to area in these crazy dreamlike transitions. I have to gush here about the visuals and sound design. All the horrifying ambient noises and enemy noises are so well done. As a fun detail, if you're hiding and an enemy approaches you, you can actually hear Sebastian's heartbeat get louder. As for the graphics, for a decade-old game, it still looks pretty good. Everything has a good amount of detail, and the lighting is on point for most areas, despite them mostly being dimly lit hallways or industrial areas. Since the visuals can change drastically from area to area, I'll talk about them more individually as I get to them. Anyway, we grab a knife from a nearby body, cut ourselves down, and sneak up to grab some keys. This early part of the game introduces the player to the stealth mechanics, which sometimes work and sometimes they don't. As we're making our escape, we trigger an alarm and are then chased by the sadist. We narrowly escape after some cat and mouse with the sadist, through long corridors, and then a sewer for some reason, and eventually arrive in an elevator. At the top floor, we're back at Beacon, which is now experiencing an earthquake. Leaving out the main doors, we're met by Oscar, Kidman, the doctor from earlier, and his patient Leslie. Unfortunately, no Joseph to be found. You guys take an ambulance out just as the ground collapses around you, but on looking from the top of the building at the citywide destruction is the man from earlier before disappearing once again. We fast and furious our way through the city, catching a glimpse of the mysterious man once again, who's now in the back of the ambulance, before Oscar begins some kind of horrific transformation. What could be the cause of this? A virus? Some supernatural force? It's a lot more ridiculous than that, but we'll get there. The tunnel then ends and we fall off a cliff into some woods. We then have a vision of being wheeled down a hallway by some hospital staff before waking up in a padded room. This is the safe room of Evil Within, where we go to upgrade our stats in what appears to be the most painful way possible. I don't know what exactly is going on here, but it looks like they're just shooting the goo into your arms and frying your brain like a really depressed toaster strudel. If you couldn't tell by now, this has a lot of the same gameplay staples as classic survival horror mainstays like Resident Evil, right down to the safe room and finding lore notes and hidden collectibles which give you little keys to unlock bonuses. You leave here and get your first real taste of combat, which is your standard third-person over-the-shoulder shooter. Seeing Oscar, you follow him to find him heavily mutated and in a violent frenzy eating a dead body. So you grab a gun off the ground, as any true red-blooded American does in these situations, and give him the old Yeller treatment. You follow a path to find Leslie, who warns you of a trap and then runs off again.
Hospital! Hospital! Hospital!
Skipping ahead, you stumble across a village and the doctor from earlier who tells you Leslie ran ahead and that you guys have to find him. It's very important. However, he ran through a gate that locked behind him, and you guys have to figure out a way to open it. Upon reaching it, you find that it's being held closed by some chains, so you have to find a way to cut the chains.
Maybe a chainsaw or something.
Thankfully, the sadist from earlier is now here, locked in a barn. So we free him, and all hell breaks loose. Mutated villagers known as the Haunted and the Sadist chase you around the village, and I can't help but be reminded of the opening section from Resident Evil 4. I think I died like 5 or 6 times at this part. It is the first part that I would consider to be particularly difficult, and it really nails the tense atmosphere, despite being a bit on the frustrating side at times. Speaking of frustration, this is where I talk about the difficulty and some personal gripes with the game. I might just be bad at video games, but Mikami wasn't kidding about the survival part of survival horror. You hardly have any stamina, and if you use it all, you have to wait a long time to start moving again. Healing takes time, even opening doors takes time, unless you want to alert the whole area to your presence. The game doesn't give you nearly enough ammo to go in guns a-blazing, so you have to kind of play like a pussy and knife them when they aren't looking, or lead them into traps, which I'll admit is pretty satisfying. As much as I admire a slower paced game, it can be frustrating getting cornered by 5 dudes that just woke up off the ground that you missed setting on fire earlier and have to restart a checkpoint because of it. As far as how the game feels to play, the movement and contextual button prompts aren't always the most responsive, so you might die from getting stuck in the geometry. Sebastian sometimes handles like he's about 90 years old, and sometimes the hitboxes are a little wonky, but overall I'd say that the gameplay handles pretty well, and most of the weapons feel really good to use. It's definitely a game where you have to plan out your route and how you want to proceed before going in. Really take careful note of your surroundings and make sure you didn't miss anything that could help or harm you. Back to the story. We dispatch him and he's seemingly absorbed by the man, who then vanishes again. We collect the chainsaw to cut open the door and press onward. Sebastian and the doctor proceed into a hospice owned by the doctor's brother that Leslie was previously in the care of. We track down Leslie into a basement only to get ambushed by the mysterious man again, who the doctor refers to as Ruvik.
Oh God, no. Ruvik, it is you.
Then in a hallway scene that reminds me of the blood elevator scene from The Shining, we're washed away and teleported to an arena where Ruvik shows up and spawns a bunch of enemies.
What is going on here?
Once we've handled those, we find ourselves in a hospital, only to get jump scared by this spider-like grudge-looking abomination, who pursues us until we climb down a ladder. This bitch is horrifying, but really cool at the same time. Visually one of the best looking characters in the game, and that's high praise considering the rest of the enemy design. After escaping her, we wander through some hospital areas populated by these invisible guys that are kind of a pain. Notably, they can still push the props around the room, so that's a good way to feel out where they are currently. Thankfully, this area is pretty short. We go to find a keycard for the door and move on without too much trouble. Capping off this area is a puzzle that shows the history of Ruvik's life, and this one isn't rocket science. We just match the button to the symbols on the wall, and after all 3 are completed, it makes a blood door and we can carry onward. We stumble upon Joseph in a bathtub, and he begins mutating like the other people that we've seen and briefly tries to kill us, but resists it somehow.
I thought it was something electronic.
Joseph, after Connolly, I thought... I don't know what came over me.
As we attempt to leave, we find Kidman stuck in what feels to me like a bootleg saw trap. This is your standard defeat the Horde part, then turn some dials to free her.
Look. It's much more elaborate. The upper dial to 22 and the lower dial to 5.
The floor then collapses around us, and we find ourselves in more dark hallways, where we kill some enemies and reunite with Joseph and Kidman. You guys work together to open a door, but are then dragged through the floor by some hands belonging to the spider-like creature, and are dropped into another series of long hallways. This area kinda sucks because it's filled with traps, so one wrong move and you're starting back from the checkpoint, buddy. Navigating to the end of that, we're ambushed once again by the spider lady and her horrifying shriek. The keen-eyed among you may have noticed all the puddles of oil on the ground, and that's on purpose. We can't really run, so we shoot the floor, setting her on fire, which is particularly effective for plot reasons that we'll find out in a bit. Pushing forward, we enter a boss arena where we have to evade her attacks while luring her into fire-based traps. All in all, not a terrible fight. With her screamy ass finally put down for good, we go forward into what appears to be a lab, where we see a memory of Ruvik and Leslie, where Leslie's hooked up to a machine, and Ruvik ominously states that he's compatible. Before they're replaced with more enemies, which we knock down and unplug from the machine. We don't know it yet, but this machine's the focal point of the game in a way, and for a brief second it flashes into a giant brain before we're sent through another sequence. This time showing Kidman stabbing us with something before we wake up in the safe room.
Has something startled you?
Leaving the safe room, we briefly see a hulking man with a safe for a head before we're teleported to an area that we've seen in pictures from earlier. Finally, a change in scenery, some light and fresh air. On that note, I just want to point out how nice the environments look in this game. It could be the bias of finally getting a break from being crammed into 90,000 dark hallways and hospitals, which, mind you, also look great, but for a game released in 2014, this looks pretty good at times. Anyway, we find a passed out Joseph, and are then attacked by more enemies. In this segment, you just hold him off for some time until Joseph can disarm the explosive doors.
Another one?
Getting away from the horde for a second, you see a tower which you guys decide to climb, but before we can, we have to take care of the enemies guarding it. We do this by shooting some guys in towers who are manning some harpoon Gatling guns, and once they're all dead, we have to clear to go to the tower.
Nothing should stand in the way of getting to the tower now.
But not before the sadist shows up again. This fight can be rough just due to the enclosed space, but once he's dealt with, we go up to the elevator and arrive at a bridge leading to what looks like a church. We have to hold him off once again while Joseph cranks a wheel to open a door.
Hurry, this way!
Narrowly escaping more enemies, we walk through a small market area just before the church, and Joseph remarks that this place feels like we're jumbled up in memories, which is more spot on than he knows. Approaching the church, the way in is blocked, and we encounter two giant enemies that remind me of that one from Resident Evil 4, and after fighting them, we can pull a button on a statue which opens a secret passage.
I guess we go down.
I guess so.
We jump down and arrive in some tunnels under the church where we solve some puzzles before arriving at a totally not ominous elevator. Taking that up, we finally arrive at the gates of the church before we're attacked by an average pitbull. Don't worry, he's friendly, I swear. After defeating it, we pick up Joseph, who pulls a Velma from Scooby-Doo and loses his glasses. Obviously, he can't see without those, so we risk life and limb to go back and grab his glasses and move forward into the church. Going in, we hear Kidman and Leslie talking before Joseph has another coughing fit and going full doomer, talking about jumping in front of trains like me walking into my day job.
Where the subway rolls by.
We then see Ruvik appear and he starts fucking with gravity, and we fall through the floor into the catacombs beneath the church. Down here we see references to something called the Keeper, and a brief flash of the creature, but in order to proceed we have to get 3 keys to open a door, before arriving in an arena and confronting the big bitch. I remember him being heavily used in the promotional material for this game, and while it kind of spoils the big reveal, I genuinely thought this was the coolest thing. He reminds me a ton of Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, and I really like that kind of character design. Also, fun fact, the sack that he carries around is full of nails and his victims' heads. He doesn't fight fair, so he floods the room with toxic gas, and we have to defeat him quickly and turn it off. His fight breaks down to shooting him until he goes down, running ahead to turn off the gas, which has the slowest crank in the universe, before he materializes again from another safe. Each moment here felt tense, not knowing if he's going to pop back up before I'm able to finish cranking the wheel. Once that's done, we crush him for the time being and go ahead into some caves. This area kinda sucks. There's a bunch of these little guys that swarm you, and you're stuck in water for most of it, so you move really slowly. And some two-headed creatures the game calls alter egos, which are pretty tanky and can do some big damage. It's capped off by a puzzle that's so stupidly simple that I actually messed it up the first time. Basically, you find a key that one side is smeared with blood, and that's the side that you aren't supposed to use. Ahead is the same bathtub lab as before, with the doctor in it, where he finally reveals the big plot device. You and everyone else here are in a machine called STEM that links brains together in a sort of shared consciousness, where Ruvik made himself the center of the world. You're basically stuck in the mind of a psychopath, and all these environments and enemies are some part of his psyche or memories.
And we're all inside his head.
He and Dr. Jimenez created the machine, but just before it was completed, the doctor betrayed Ruvik and trapped him here. Being the completely rational human he is, his response was just to try and kill everyone.
Well, it's just a theory, but I'd say he wants us dead.
Just then, the world shifts into a hospital where you're chased down a hall by a massive creature. Upon escaping, you're shown someone else's memories, before ending back up at the safe room, and it seems like realities seem to be merging together.
Detective Castellanos?
Was that someone else's memories?
Exiting the safe room, we find ourselves at a house that we've seen earlier in photographs. This is Ruvik's house where he grew up. This place has some really neat set pieces, and the atmosphere is top-notch. It reminds me a bit of the Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil 1 at times. It's kind of annoying though that Ruvik can just sometimes appear and insta-kill you, which you can assume you can hide from, but no, he always knows where you are, so you kind of just have to run away, which I think is more annoying than anything. To proceed, you have to open a big door, which you do by making blood run from 3 puzzles hidden in the house, and honestly, they're not that bad. The first 2 are just stabbing parts of a brain, which reminds me a bit of that eyeball scene from Dead Space 2. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to blur that bit. The third, you have to find 2 lock dials, which are near parts of a painting. The painting is actually the answer to that puzzle. During this time, you'll see flashbacks of Ruvik as a child, where he kills his parents after they lock him in a basement after some sort of accident. He then begins doing science of questionable moral standing, which is noticed by the doctor, who he agrees to work with, along with a mysterious organization, in order to get people to experiment on and further his research into the brain. Once we get the door open, we have to go through some scripted walking sequences where we avoid traps while being chased by a blood man. This part with the mannequin heads is probably the coolest looking part of the whole scene. Eventually, we emerge at a field of sunflowers, a very out-of-place area for this game, but as crazy as it is, I shouldn't be surprised anymore. Anyway, it shows us why Ruvik is the way that he is now. Some villagers burned down his parents' barn out of revenge, with him and his sister Laura still stuck inside.
Kids in there.
I didn't hear anything.
She saves him, but he's badly burned, and she dies, which leads him down to the path that we saw at the mansion. His reasoning for building the device is to be reunited with his sister in a way. This boss fight for this area is just another shooting gallery of regular enemies, which seems kind of anticlimactic after all of that. After this, we end up in an area where it seems like Ruvik was putting people through traps like a wannabe Jigsaw. This part really annoyed me. There's many enemies in small spaces and so many things that'll basically insta-kill you. It was honestly more frustrating than anything. We have to find 2 batteries needed to power a door so that we can move on. And after a mad dash through a bunch of spinning blades and other death traps, we run into our good friend the Spider Lady. And if you didn't figure it out by now, that's Laura, Ruvik's sister that got burned alive. We run away from her and escape to an elevator only to be confronted by Ruvik himself, where we finally get to talk with him, and he spouts some ominous cryptic dialogue before the elevator continues into the lower depths.
Who do you think you are? I know who you are. Seb. I know what you crave, what you fear. Will you be able to live with yourself knowing what I'm gonna make you do? Poor little Joseph couldn't. Too bad they dragged you into this. But either way, you're mine. To do with as I please.
We leave the elevator to find ourselves back at the lab with the doctor and Leslie, where the doctor's performing an experiment on him, remarking that he's the only patient ever to survive being linked to Ruvik, and he's their only way out.
The only patient ever, as far as I know. He's our way out, Detective. Our only way back.
The experiment fails and a massive abomination known as the Amalgam appears. The Amalgam is stated to be the combined physical manifestation of the test subjects who died in STEM. It slow-mo kills the doctor, and we're launched into a basement area where we have to take the monstrosity down.
That's it. That's why.
Doctor, run!
He wants the same thing as us. He wants out!
With that taken care of, we get on an elevator and go up, emerging once again to Crimson City, but almost fully destroyed now, with only the mental hospital intact. I wonder why that is. We decide to make our way there, and man, I don't think we get enough games with the ruined cityscapes, because this is really cool aesthetically. Gameplay-wise though, it's probably the lowest part of the game for me. It just sends a bunch of heavily armored guys at you with automatic weapons in a linear path. As we make our way through the city, avoiding giant fish monsters, we reunite with Kidman, who locks us in a room because we started turning into one of those creatures and attacked her. Leslie lets us out, before we run into Joseph, who states that he's found us a ride, and that we should head towards Beacon. Kidman then shows up seemingly running from something, and apparently we're all good now. Anyway, we get attacked by the thing chasing her, which turns out to be a giant spider creature. What will the game throw at us next? We get chased through the ruined city in this high-speed chase, narrowly escaping before the giant spider creature gets crushed by some falling debris. Ruvik then appears and throws the bus we're on, and we crash through a building. Sebastian and Joseph notice a train that looks like it could be used as a bridge, so we decide to head towards there through some apartments and make our way towards the hospital. We get separated from Joseph again and have another run-in with the Keeper.
You again?
We do another boss fight against him, and after we beat him, we chase after Joseph. Eventually we make it out to the ground floor, where we find Kidman leading Leslie to a park. She remarks that she can't let Ruvik have him, and attempts to shoot him before we and Joseph intervene. This causes Leslie to yell, which starts to tear the world apart around us, and we fall into a subway system.
I can't let him have this boy.
The subway is initially full of the same armored enemies that we've seen throughout the city, but as we go further, we see glimpses of some kind of tentacle creature. We make our way through fighting enemies and collecting fuses as we go, and end up at an elevator. Plugging the fuses in and going to start up the generator, we're attacked by an invisible enemy. This is the aforementioned tentacle monster known as the Quell in-game. We kill it and head up the elevator, where we finally make it to the train. As we cross, we're threatened by Ruvik again and thrown into another flashback. In the flashback, we're shown that the doctor betrayed Ruvik and published all of Ruvik's work under his name. And just before STEM was completed, the doctor along with some men in suits arrive and restrain Ruvik and force him to be the first test subject for the machine, subjecting him to his own tests that he performed on others, eventually disassembling his whole body, leaving only his brain in the machine. Note here that you can find an audio log explaining that they used his own sedatives on him so that he feels everything. Kind of karma, I guess, for him, but still very sadistic.
No matter. I have what I need. All that's left is the procedure.
Indeed. That is why we are here.
We? You wouldn't dare. You couldn't complete it without me.
Precisely.
We arrive back at Beacon Mental Hospital for the game's final chapter, aptly named An Evil Within.
Beacon, just like Joseph said.
We make our way through the hospital in a way that's very similar to the opening of the game, which I personally love when games do. Until we encounter Ruvik, who tries to take us out in the same way he did the cops from earlier. However, Sebastian doesn't go down so easily, so we slap him with our trusty lantern, setting him on fire, which throws us into an arena where we have to fight waves of enemies, ending on our old friend the Sadist, armed this time with a chainsaw and a rocket launcher. After beating him, we go forward into another boss fight, this time with two Keepers. If you've saved the Magnum ammo, here's a good time to use it. We go down a hallway where Ruvik states that we can't keep him here, avoiding traps and eye lasers, and get to an elevator where the final showdown happens.
can't be.
We find Kidman and Leslie where she tries once again to kill him, but Sebastian gets in the way, which proves to be the wrong choice as Ruvik absorbs Leslie and the world begins to spin and Ruvik transforms into a giant monster. We finish him off in trusted Resident Evil fashion by using a rocket launcher dropped by our good friend the Sadist, and one final slow-mo shot to the head, which I think is so cheesy but so fun. We then wake up in a bathtub, stomp Ruvik's brain into a paste, and finally, for real this time, wake up in the real world.
I created this world. You cannot keep me here.
Kidman is there and motions us to pretend that we're asleep, as she states to leave Sebastian and the
Leave
other
that
two.
one. And those two. They're not going anywhere.
But strangely, Leslie is absent. As we walk out of the hospital in the real world, we're met by a SWAT team. Leslie's briefly seen walking away, but not in his usual fashion. The game then ends. Alright, so that was a lot to take in, and the plot isn't always super clear, so I'm going to summarize it in a few sentences here. Sebastian gets called into Beacon Mental Hospital and is knocked out and hooked into STEM, which is a machine made by Dr. Menez and Ruvik that links brains together. Ruvik's betrayed by the Doctor and mysterious organization, subsequently dismembered and used as the core of STEM, and now he wants out and needs Leslie's body to do it. You defeat him, kill his brain, but he escapes in Leslie's body anyway. Crystal clear now? There's some cliffhangers and unresolved plot points, but is mostly told in the background through journal entries, most of which will get expanded on in the second game, so I'll bring those up when I get to that one. I think this game is absolutely fantastic in terms of atmosphere and setting. In terms of gameplay, I think the difficulty can be a bit harsh, bordering on frustrating at times, but it almost never felt unfair. They give you just enough supplies to make the enemies manageable, but I never got so overpowered that it undermined the tenseness of the situation. The way it's designed makes every resource valuable, and every missed shot could spell the end for you. That forces the player to carefully observe and use their surroundings to their advantage. The moment-to-moment gameplay seems so meticulously crafted in order to give that sense of escaping by the skin of your teeth, and I think that's exactly the kind of experience Mikami wanted to make. I'm not saying it works 100% of the time, as it is still a very mixed bag, but when it works, it works. Each area felt well crafted, and honestly I can't praise the visuals enough on the game. The art and enemy design I believe is the strongest selling point for the game, as all the creatures are just a spectacle to look at. They're body horror at its finest, and I couldn't praise Akumi Nakamura enough for her work on that. She goes hard in the next game too. I like how all the enemies in game are either things created or twisted by Ruvik's brain. They're all parts of him for lack of a better description, and I think that's a really cool way to weave the design in with the narrative. The storytelling, while a bit convoluted with shifting realities and flashbacks, had me hooked, and made me want to press onward to find out what's going on. It's a bit goofy at times, but I don't think that retracts from the experience. Kind of similar to a cheesy B-movie in that way. Goofy, but in an endearing way. It's also not a concept we see that often, so I think it's kind of unique and refreshing when it comes to horror games, which can all eventually feel kind of samey. I hope my brief summary of it all comes off at least semi-coherent. Alright, take a breather. That was the first game minus the DLCs, which just flesh out some of the lore of the world and delve into Kidman's ties with the mysterious organization behind it all, but the second game basically covers all that anyway, so I'll talk about it then. Alright, let's get on with the second one. The Evil Within 2's opening segment takes place in a flashback sequence that happens long before the events of the first game, and shows some backstory that was covered in some of the police journal entries from Sebastian that we found in the first game. It depicts a suspicious house fire at Sebastian's house that allegedly claimed the life of his daughter and caused his wife to leave. The man really can't catch a break. Now I see why he goes from looking like this to this. Visually, this game looks even better than the first one in terms of graphics, while still maintaining that same aesthetic style that you expect from the series. The textures and particle effects have all gained a significant boost, and the design of the enemies and set pieces are still phenomenal, but I'll talk more about each one as I get to it. For now, let's continue the plot. The game takes place 3 years after the events of the first game, however this one is much more emotionally driven and focused on Sebastian as a character. Sebastian, featuring a beard that makes him look cool and rugged, or homeless and depressed depending on how you look at it, wakes up from his nightmare on the table of a bar, so I'm gonna guess the second option. Julie Kidman's there, and after a brief chat, Sebastian states that he's been looking for her for 3 years after the events at Beacon Mental Hospital, and he wants answers about the organization behind the events of the game, finally name-dropping them as Mobius, which you can think of a lot like Umbrella from Resident Evil, but with more resources and much further reaching. So maybe more akin to the Illuminati or something. They were the men in suits that the Doctor was with that you saw for like 10 seconds in the base game. She states that she couldn't tell him at the risk of being killed for it, while ominously being watched by Mobius agents. He very reasonably gets mad, and she tells him to put Beacon behind him, which you'll see is a running theme here, and goes on to tell him that his daughter, who he thought was dead, has been alive this entire time, and that Sebastian needs to come with her in order to save her. It was Mobius that caused the fire, then faked her death and took her, to which he reacts exactly how you'd expect, and after a short scuffle is knocked out by Kidman.
Where did you get this? Get your hands off me!
I was hoping you'd come willingly, Sebastian. We need you. Lily needs you.
Coming to, Sebastian finds himself being wheeled down a hallway in a Mobius facility. At the end of the hallway being a whole new STEM system created by Mobius after gathering data from the Beacon incident. However, the core this time is Sebastian's long-lost daughter. Talking to the almost comically evil administrator of Mobius, you learn that they've lost contact with Lily and the whole system is going haywire, so you're being sent in to find her. Right before being sent into the system, Kidman remarks that someone is in there for you.
And someone else will be in there for you. Are you ready? STEM entry in 3, 2, 1.
Upon entering STEM, you're sent to your new safe room. Much like the previous game, your safe room is used to upgrade your abilities in the same uncomfortable looking fashion as before, but now you can chat with Tatiana the nurse from the first game. It's got the same lockers as the last game where you find keys to get little bonus items, and new to this game is a crafting station. As they've shifted the game to an open world survival horror style, you can now find crafting materials throughout the world that allow you to make ammo and healing items, as well as parts to upgrade your weapons. The safe room also contains a projector that shows slides of Sebastian's life, which give you more insight into the world of Evil Within, as well as many other things to collect. So if you like combing over the world, finding each and every collectible, this is definitely a plus in terms of gameplay. Exiting the safe room through the same mirror as last time, we're shown a flashback of a happy memory of Sebastian with his wife and daughter, before being dumped into what appears to be an art gallery of sorts. In the gallery, we're shown a man who seemingly murders people and freezes them in time at the moment of their death, who looks like Tobey Maguire from Spider-Man 3. We sneak past him, with this acting as the Evil Within 2's stealth mechanic tutorial, which is a bit better in this game, as you can hit space to crouch and move against walls and peer around corners. We move past him and make our way through a gallery towards this area with all these hanged corpses. Passing through a door, we see the killer who takes a quick picture of Sebastian and then leaves. We approach a mirror with the photo that the man took of us, and just as we turn around, a huge monstrosity known as the Guardian breaks through the mirror and chases us down. This is very similar to the opening of the first one where we're chased by the sadist, and invokes the same tense feeling while being chased, even if it is heavily scripted. On that note, the noises this bitch make are pretty fucking terrifying. Being an amalgamation of all the killer's victims, it sounds like many voices laughing at once, and I think that's so cool despite being kind of unsettling. We run down some hallways and through some vents before seeing an elevator in the distance, and as we make a break for it, we're chased by the Guardian. The man then appears and throws a knife into Sebastian's shoulder. And when we're approached by the Guardian, we use that knife to fight off the creature, just enough to get away. As we jump into the elevator, we're teleported into an abandoned house. We patch ourselves up and go outside to contact Kidman. We walk down the street and enter a house where we see one of the residents feeding a child in an almost manic state, who then decides the best way to make someone eat is just to bash their head off the table. The woman then mutates and attacks you. This is the first real taste of combat, which feels just as good as it did in the last game, and the guns somehow feel more chunky than the last one. Maybe due to the better dismemberment on limbs, but that's just a guess. These are the common enemies of the game, referred to as the Lost. These are STEM citizens that have been entirely dominated by the system, as STEM mentally erodes those connected to it over time, eventually dominating their psyches and turning them into one of these or one of the unique variants. We dispatch her and go outside walking down a road, finding a sign that tells us this place is called Union, which, being a linked consciousness, is a very clever name. Walking down the road, we see a Mobius agent being chased by more creatures, so we follow him. This is O'Neill. He acts as kind of a guide during the early part of this game, telling us where to go and where to begin our hunt for Lily, which the only lead currently is a voice over the communicator. We track the signals, moving from one resonance point to another, which are basically just memories left in the world. These ones showing flashbacks of Lily running from something. I should talk briefly about the open world here. There's lots of little areas to explore in this early part of the game, and veering off the main path can yield crafting supplies, pouches to upgrade carrying capacity, or giving some unique weapons such as the crossbow, which functions identically to the one from the first game. And while I don't know if it was a necessary change from the more linear structure of the first game, it's absolutely very fun to explore and find all the little collectibles. Most of the non-necessary areas contain the important lore bits, and for those of us who like video game lore, I think it's absolutely worth it to check these out. One house that you can enter early on depicts the events just after Beacon, where Sebastian was going through therapy trying to come to terms with what happened at the hospital. This unresolved trauma is a major plot point for the game, and a personal hurdle for Sebastian as a character. Despite overcoming the challenges he's been presented with, they still haunt him. It's because of this trauma that he was selected as a target for a special enemy that you can encounter in this chapter called the Anima. The Anima is special because it's not a creature manifested by one person. It's caused by the STEM environment dominating the minds of those connected to it. It can only be seen by those it's hunting, and is noted by a chill in the air and the humming that can be heard along with it. You can find lore notes from previous victims which were driven to paranoia from it tormenting them. If you confront it at every chance that you get a special weapon at the end, which is Sebastian's police revolver from the first game. I guess it's supposed to be symbolic of Sebastian overcoming the events of Beacon or whatever. Getting back to the main story, you track Lily's trail down to a warehouse where you find that Lily was captured by Tobey Maguire. As you follow him outside, he teleports away and a giant eye is spawned in the sky, and it creates a few monsters that you have to kill. You find out that he's probably hiding out in City Hall, and O'Neill states that you have to go through somewhere called the Marrow, which is essentially the back end of STEM to get there. He gives you a gas mask, as the infrastructure collapse of Union has caused a gas leak in the tunnels, and you head out. Entering the Marrow through a computer across town, we make our way through the passages until we reach a sewer area where the gas leak is. This is where the game shifts to a first-person point of view, which is surprisingly cool and tense. This horrifying monster stalks up and down here, but can be taken out with a few stealth attacks. We finally get through there, and we end up at another terminal that lets us out at City Hall. This part kicks off with us approaching the gate, only to be taunted by Tobey Maguire, taking more pictures of us, and having his giant eyeball spawn another Guardian. This boss fight isn't too bad. There's a lot of traps in the area that you can lead her into, which will take her out in no time. That allows us to just walk right in the front door, where a dying Mobius agent tells us to turn on something called a stable field emitter. We make our way through the halls, seeing more of the man's art, and solving some puzzles before finding the emitter. We attempt to turn it on, only to come face to face with the artist before stating that his name is Stefano, who then freezes time and talks to us about how somebody else needs the power of the core. He then proclaims Sebastian as his art before disappearing, but not before spawning the Obscura that we have to fight off while the emitter resets. I really like the design of this thing. It reminds me something straight out of Silent Hill, and being one of the guardians of the artist, it's only natural that it's shaped like a camera. Anyway, this boss fight boils down to shooting it when it freezes time until time starts moving again, rinse and repeat until the machine boots back up. Once that's handled, we go outside to see that he's moved again, this time to a theater across town that we have to go back through the Marrow to access. Moving through the passages, we're confronted by, and I can't believe I'm saying this, don't laugh, a giant monster made out of white goo. We escape it and wind up in another safe house, populated by Yukiko Hoffman, the Mobius psychology expert, who explains that people who exhibit psychopathic tendencies can influence the STEM environment. Really not great forward planning on Mobius's part after the last time this exact situation happened, but I digress. She recommends destroying something he finds important, which I'll give you 2 guesses as to what that is. We leave the safe house and approach the theater he's holed up in to find that the entrance is blocked off by some paintings. Stefano tells us to appreciate his art, so we have to seek out and destroy 2 paintings hidden elsewhere in Union. These aren't too bad. It usually involves navigating a small area, finding a key to unlock a door, then creeping through these electrified wires and stabbing his art.
Here we go.
Once we do that, we can enter the theater to confront Stefano, who's hiding in the main theater area with a bunch of captive Union citizens in the audience. He talks about how he's going to continue making his art forever before showing off his newest piece. All of the audience members are rigged with explosives. He detonates them and freezes them in that moment before lamenting about not knowing how to top this one. He then walks away down a hallway which leads to a void with crumbling parts of the hallway floating around, where we have to navigate along, all while his camera eyeball monster looks from afar. Its gaze will hurt you, so we have to basically play hide and seek as we make our way forward. Reaching the end, we confront him in a boss fight.
Your death will be art.
His boss fight consists of him teleporting near us, where we shoot him a few times and then he pops away again. Nothing too crazy. When he gets close to death, his eyeball monster rips the ceiling off and will slap at us sometimes, but otherwise the fight remains unchanged.
I've had enough of this. Here, go. Die! Nothing left. I'm done.
As he lies there dying, he tries to take one last picture with his camera, which we reward with a shot of our own. Get it? Shot.
Last photo.
Sebastian then leaves the area, and out in the theater we find Lily, who thought Sebastian has been dead this whole time. Just then, a robed woman appears, who we find out is Myra, Sebastian's wife, who left in search of their daughter. She collapses to the floor and takes Lily, Sebastian falling in after them.
Come to Mother, Lily. I will protect you.
Myra.
Get away. You can't have her.
No!
Sebastian then wakes up at his desk in his room, where something is now different. There's an altar with some candles where the mirror to leave should be. Upon inspecting it, we're grabbed by some flaming hands and teleported to what seems to be some catacombs, with the same symbol plastered everywhere and a voice that urges us to proceed onward.
I am here to help.
There's a bunch of the lost here in cells that'll occasionally wander around looking for Sebastian. The easiest way to proceed is to take them all out, and then turn this crank to open the big door. In the next room, we have to solve a puzzle where we make the symbol on the ground using these giant spinning puzzle pieces. Once completed, it fills with blood, unlocking the main door. Going down this main hallway, we meet the boss of the area, a man called Father Theodore, who berates Sebastian's actions and his way of dealing with
That is
things.
how you deal with every challenge in your life. Through brute force and intimidation. And look where it has led you.
He offers for Sebastian to join him in getting Lily from Myra. Sebastian demands to know where their whereabouts are, to which Theodore states that he can't tell them until he joins them, summoning a river of blood and washing Sebastian away for now. We awaken in a shack with a Mobius agent named Taurus, who's defending us from a horde of the Lost. We get up and help defend from waves of Lost here.
Later. Focus on staying alive.
She tells us that her safe house isn't far from here, and that she knows who we are thanks to Kidman, mentioning a plan that they hatched to take down Mobius from the inside. On the way to the safe house, we'd find that the way there has been collapsed, so we have to make our way around, through some areas populated by Theodore's Lost, known as the Disciples, and a flamethrower-wielding creature known as the Harbinger. These guys frequently set themselves ablaze and can't be stealth killed then. They're very bulky and can do some considerable damage with their charge. Sneaking past them or killing them, we make our way to the hidden hatch where the safe house is, which is filled with explosives. We explain that Theodore is insane, and he's seeking Lily and will tear apart STEM to find her. So the goal is to take Theodore out in hopes that Myra will come to her senses. Then we can get her and Lily out of STEM. We just have to find them. So we contact Kidman to tell her we're in on the plan to take down Mobius, and we try and contact O'Neill to see if he can help us find Theodore. Strangely though, he doesn't answer back, so we have to head through the Marrow to check up on him. We head back to Hoffman's safe house to find that Theodore's influence is spreading across STEM, and Hoffman is nowhere to be found. We find a residence where we hear that she was contacted by O'Neill, and they were supposed to meet in a restricted area of the Marrow.
Getting your signal. Never mind. It doesn't matter. Where are you? What? That's on the other side of the laboratory. It's a restricted area. We were told never to go there. We don't have clearance. How did you... Okay, I understand. Yes, I'll meet you there. Just be careful.
So we go to that section to find a long white tunnel that leads to what appears to be a set of labs, where Mobius was running tests on the Lost. I absolutely love this area aesthetically. It could be the bias of really liking the Nest area of Resident Evil 2, which heavily reminds me of that, but I thought it was a really neat change of pace. Anyway, we have to find a chip that's implanted in every Mobius agent in order to open a door. Conveniently, there's a dead Mobius agent in a lab not far from here, so we make our way there to get the chip. We can find a section of the lab that has a memory that talks about the Lost phenomenon, and how they can't figure out what's causing it, and that all of Union will soon be doomed within weeks. In the other lab, we find the agent along with the machine needed to extract the chip. It needs a code, but thankfully it's written down right near the body. Getting that triggers the lab to open all the doors and release tons of Lost into the area. Veering off the main path for a second, you can encounter the anima for the final time here. It's the same as the previous encounters where you avoid it while making your way through the maze. We find some lore notes here about how Mobius was monitoring Sebastian and observing the after effects of STEM, and how they've got people on the inside of the police department. This one ends with Sebastian encountering himself from the first game, mumbling about how he's not able to let go of the past. We shoot him, metaphorically putting the past behind us and escaping.
Part of me still stuck in STEM. Never getting out. No. I'm wrong. I will get out. But without you. What was that? It felt different than the others. More real. Like something changed. I feel... good. Huh. My trusty revolver. I haven't seen you in a long time.
We're sent back to the lab after that detour. Making our way past the door, we find the next boss arena. We overhear some people talking, finding Hoffman pleading with one of the Harbingers, who we find out is a controlled O'Neill.
Stay back!
Stay out of my way, Sebastian.
O'Neill, what happened?
Theodore showed me the way. I am his now.
He gave into Theodore's brainwashing and was turned into a Harbinger. This boss fight isn't too bad. He moves slowly but can also kill you really quickly. However, there's enough edges and corners that he has a hard time hitting you. Upon defeating him, he thanks you for finally freeing him from Theodore's influence and tells you to destroy the device in the next room that Theodore is using to hide himself. We call Torres to bring her explosives and destroy the machine.
Looking for an excuse to use it too.
Good. I'm sending you my coordinates. Bring the big guns.
Doing so causes Torres to vanish and Sebastian to hear Theodore's voice.
Torres? Where'd you...
Sebastian Castellanos. You refuse to step into the darkness. So you try to bring me to the light. Come then. I await you.
This sends us to an area with a bunch of ruins of Sebastian's old house in a sea of blood. This area is basically a straight shot through with a few enemies scattered around. Making our way to the end, we finally find him. He shows us a vision of his daughter and uses Sebastian's guilt about not saving her from the fire against him.
Lily!
You let this happen to me. Why didn't you save me?
Sebastian tries to shoot him, but ends up shooting Torres instead.
Stop me. Will you never learn?
We pass out and briefly come to, seeing Torres once again protecting us from a horde of Lost. Sebastian then passes out again, and we end up in a dream sequence back in Sebastian's old house. He talks to a vision of his wife here about feeling guilty about not being able to protect Lily, and not believing Myra when she told him about Mobius kidnapping her. She tells him to forgive himself, and that he's a good man.
You're a good man, Sebastian. That's why I married you. But the most important thing is that you forgive yourself.
Forgive yourself.
This reinvigorates Sebastian and gives him the ability to fight back against Theodore's influence. He then wakes up in Hoffman's safe house. Torres brought him back here, but died from wounds received when fighting the Lost. Hoffman then explains that destroying the machine worked, and that Theodore's stronghold had appeared in Union, surrounded by a wall of fire. O'Neill was making a machine that should help with that, but it needs some work, so we're sent to clear a path to a hotel near the stronghold. We return to the business district of Union to see that all hell is broken loose. We make our way towards the hotel and signal to Hoffman, who shows up with a portable stable field emitter. This allows us to make our way through the flames to siege the stronghold. In this part, we just have to stay within the circle and protect Hoffman while disciples spawn around us. We finally make our way to the stronghold, but right at the end, Hoffman's tackled to the ground by enemies and consumed by the flames, and Sebastian is flung away.
Hoffman, no!
We arrive and are taunted by Theodore, who awaits us at the top of the tower, which looks like an area ripped straight out of a Souls game. We have to make our way up some stairs and kill some more of his disciples. Making our way up an elevator, he tries to convince us one last time to join him in capturing Lily, and explains that his plan is to take over Mobius in the real world by using Union, since their minds are all connected to it. Sebastian declines and makes his way up to his chamber to fight him. He tries the trick with the version of Sebastian's daughter, but it doesn't work because we've finally overcome the guilt of the past. So instead he tries to tap into Sebastian's fear and trauma by summoning a gauntlet of bosses from the first game.
I see you've overcome some of your guilt and pain. But the depth of your past traumas is vast. I know everything about you. I know what lies beneath. You have a deep well of fear from which to draw.
Starting with the sadist, who we proceed to cut in half with his own chainsaw. And this might be one of the coolest scenes of the whole game, so I'm gonna let it play out, although I think I have to censor this one too.
Enough of this shit!
Not this time. You think this will stop me?
We then fight the Keeper, and finally in this really cool transition we have to fight Laura, and holy shit, the soundtrack for this is so hype. This part feels like a best of compilation of the first game, and thematically Sebastian finally, literally and metaphorically conquering his fears and trauma is just so fitting considering everything that he's been through so far.
I burned you once, and I'll do it again.
Burning Laura once again ends the fight and sets Theodore on fire, and as he runs from us, he's stabbed from behind by Myra.
What are you?
What else have you got?
Sebastian pleads with her to leave with Lily, but she destroys the stronghold around us and leaves. We follow behind her to find that Union is being ripped apart at the seams, with chunks of the world floating around in the sky. We follow Myra through the destroyed streets of Union, and as we finally catch up to her, she screams and destroys the ground around us, and we fall into a pit. We wake up in a mountainous area with chunks of Union scattered around, and what appears to be ash or snow falling around us. The entire world has collapsed around us, leaving only Sebastian and Myra's house seen on a hilltop in the distance, so we decide that she has to be there. On the way there, we can see some memories of Myra and the others, creating the plan to take down Mobius and save Lily, before Theodore betrayed them and Myra turned into what she is now in order to protect Lily. We make it to the top and confront her. She wants Lily to stay so that she can protect her, but Sebastian tells her it's not real and pleads with her to leave with them. She attacks Sebastian and transforms into a giant monstrosity, so we have to fight her.
Die!
Don't make me do this!
The boss fight is fairly easy, where we shoot the big glowing weak points. She even spawns little spiders that drop resources when they die. Finally, upon defeating her, she melts into goo and reverts back into her true form, where she tells us to get Lily and get out.
Get her out of here.
We climb to the house, and it cuts to the real world in this really slick transition where Mobius is monitoring the damage to Union, and the administrator begins talking about extracting the core and subsequently killing Sebastian. Kidman then pulls out a hidden gun and shoots some agents.
How much time?
Depends on how fast he can get her to the extraction point. They're close. Shouldn't be long. Med team in place and standing by.
Once extracted, have the med team terminate the marker. He served his purpose.
It then cuts back to Sebastian, who finds Lily and picks her up and meets Myra downstairs.
When you wake up, we'll be safe again.
She explains that she has to stay and take down Mobius from the inside, since they're everywhere and they would never stop chasing them. The plan has always been to assume the position of the core and take down Mobius by killing them via the chips implanted in their heads, so she has to stay behind. We have a heartfelt goodbye, and with another smooth transition, it cuts back to Kidman shooting her way through more agents to get to the STEM room. She seals herself in and waits for Sebastian to get out of STEM. Myra then sends out the signal that kills the agents, including the administrator. Sebastian then takes Lily out of the tank, and the three walk off out of the lab. It cuts to some time later where Sebastian and Lily can finally drive off and live their lives, with Kidman finally getting her freedom from Mobius too. In a post-credit scene, we're shown the lab sometime in the future as noted by the cobwebs and dust everywhere, and the monitor briefly turns on. The game then ends. This game is absolutely goated. I liked the first one, but I absolutely loved the second. It improved upon almost everything in terms of gameplay and storytelling. While I will say the first had a better atmosphere at times, and it was a better horror game, in my opinion, the second game overall is an upgrade in every other way. The series as a whole has such a unique concept for a horror game, and the art, enemy design, and visuals are some of the coolest I've seen in a series ever. Each area felt unique, and on my first playthrough of these games, I never knew what wacky thing was coming up next, and it really kept me on the edge of my seat. The series felt like a mix of one part Resident Evil, one part Silent Hill, with an emphasis on stealth, and I think it works. It's not a series that I think everyone will enjoy, but it's definitely a love letter to the survival horror genre, and I can't respect that enough. The storytelling, while some of it made no sense and it had a lot of padding, it had a good emotional core, and honestly a good resolution to almost everything. The way Sebastian grows as a character is very fulfilling, and my only complaint here is that there were some plot points that were left unresolved, which I assume they did intentionally, in the event that it warrants a third installment. It's achieved a bit of a cult classic status, and I think they're aware of the niche popularity of the series. The good news is that Tango hasn't forgotten about it, since in their most recent game Hi-Fi Rush, there's many Easter eggs and references regarding the Evil Within, and their other IP Ghostwire Tokyo actually started its life as Evil Within 3, before dramatically shifting direction during development, becoming what it is today. So while there's formally no news regarding a third installment, it's clear that they're still thinking about it, and I can only hope that they're working on it in the background maybe. This series is goofy and campy at times, but it's full of heart and a love for the survival horror genre. For what it's trying to do, I think it does very well, and I think it's one of the most unique game series I've ever played. And that is why I think The Evil Within is the most underrated horror series. Hi there. Sorry this video took so long to make. It was probably one of the longest videos I've ever done, and it was mostly recapping plot stuff. So if you've watched this far, I just wanted to say thank you. It really means a lot. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this long-form plot summary kind of video. I don't know if it's a format that I'll do super often, but if you guys liked it, I can definitely do more of them. The next video will probably be shorter. Maybe. If you enjoyed it, leaving a like and subscribing to the channel really is the best way to support me, and I would personally appreciate it a ton. What do you guys think of The Evil Within? It seems to be a bit of a divisive game series, some thinking it's really goofy and dumb, and others claiming it to be an underrated classic, so I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments. Other channel related stuff I started a Patreon, totally not necessary, but if you feel like helping the channel and getting a few small bonus things, that'll be linked in the description. It's still a work in progress, so it's subject to change, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm going to keep making videos either way, simply because I like doing it, and I like making stuff that you guys enjoy. All of that aside, thank you once again for watching, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.